Hello, people. Can you hear me? Looks like I had one person in chat. I think I had two for a second there. Maybe in this context, it's better to not have the chat on. Yeah, that is better. That doesn't look great, but you know what? It's pretty much what we're working with. So maybe I'll try and figure out the aesthetics of it a little bit more. Or, if anybody has recommendations. Again, I think there's one person in here. That person may be a lurker, in which case I don't want to call them out and force them to join the chat. But if you're not a lurker, if you're intending on participating, then let me know if you can see and hear. Um, I'm just waiting for a second to see if anybody else stops in. I'm going to grab a glass of water. See if anybody else comes in, and I really hate the look of this, but I think I'm gonna have to suck it up. Right? I mean, not be a bitch about it. And at least you can see. I think you should be able to read that. All right, I'm gonna grab water and I will be right back. Hold down the fort for me, one chat participant. Sweet, I retained the one person in here. Oh no, I restarted my microphone. Well, I guess I'm just going to start. So uh, this is Dion Fortune. Um, Dion Fortune was a noted occultist. She was a sort of psychic occultist Qabbalist in the early on the Western occult and the role of the Qabbala in the Western occult and how the Qabbala works. Now, I want to preface this by saying I do not sign off on everything she says here. And I know that this is a dangerous territory to get into on the internet. But I don't want to suggest that everything in here is correct. I don't want to suggest that everything in here is even good. There are a few, what do I want to say? A few moments in here where she talks in kind of a clunky, antiquated way about race. She didn't say anything about, she doesn't imply racial superiority or like contempt for other races or anything like this, but she just talks in like a very, like, feels very antiquated way about race. And so I'm probably going to be skipping those sentences. You can accuse me of whitewashing if you want. That's fine. I'm just trying not to be off. I think this is the place for that. That said, you can see what she's saying up on the screen. So again, I got one person here. They're a lurker. This is a lot more dense and wordy than the A.E. Waite. It's a book that it's a really robust book. It's goes toe to toe easily with any other of the classics from the Western occult about the Qabbala. Particularly, I'm thinking about Garden of Pomegranates by Israel Regardie, any of Aleister Crowley's work. Like, this is just as literate, it's just as informed. It's very direct in how it talks. It's not too very literate without being like too literary. It's not like this rhapsodic poem or something about the Qabbala, which, you know, plenty of people have done before. So this makes for good sort of teaching material about the Qabbala. Again, some of them are problematic politically. Some of them are just like kind of like spooky in a way. Like, I just don't think that she's correct on everything that she says. So don't take it that way. As I'm going to be reading it, I'm going to be like as a for instance, she defends the idea that the Qabbala goes back to ancient temple era Jerusalem. And I think we can pretty conclusively say that that's not true. Um, uh, it does seem like the Qabbala, um, modern scholarship places the Qabbala in like the medieval period. I mean, there are some antecedent beliefs. There's some earlier stuff going on, but I think that like what we would recognize as Qabbala really appears in the medieval period. And it really flourishes after that. So I think that I read somewhere that we have a source that is a scrap of paper or papyrus that lists all in order from like the 1st century or something like that. It's like proto-Kabbalistic stuff going on before the medieval period. It wasn't a really robust discourse. And she makes allusions to what do I want to say? She makes allusions to manuscripts being are a bit antiquated. Maybe not all of her. I don't know what her politics is, but the way she talks about certain political issues is very antiquated. That said, this is a really robust document in many, many ways, and I'm excited to get into it. So I'm still waiting to see if there's going to be more people or if it's just the one this evening. I also sort of half suspect that this one person in the chat is just me. Uh, Hmm. I worry that this is going to look weird on like the VOD because I keep saying things and then like clicking off to do something else. But I'm just kind of waiting to see if we're going to get more people or if it's going to be just the one. I don't know why this gets to my head so much that I feel like there should be more people, more participation happening. Maybe I'm expecting too much as a new streamer with no audience, but oh well. Uh, Hopefully people will come back and watch out when it comes out. Okay. Well, I should pop the chat out. Can I do that? Can I minimize that and then keep the chat up? That's not going to happen, is it? Maybe I can do this. Yeah, I'm going to have to do something like that. Well, I guess here we go. Forward. The Tree of Life is the ground plan of esoteric tradition and is the system upon which pupils are turned of the inner light. The transliteration of Hebrew words into English gave opinion, every scholar appearing to have his own system. In these pages, I have a veiled medical table given by McGregor Mathers in the Qabbala Veiled because this book is the one generally used by esoteric students. He himself does not adhere to his own table systematically, however, and even uses different spellings for the same words. This is very confusing for anyone who wishes to use the geometric method of elucidation, in which letters are turned into numbers. When, therefore, Mathers gives alternative transliterations, I have followed the one which coincides with that given in his own table. A second person signed in. Yay! If you're a lurker, welcome. If you're not a lurker, say what's up. I don't want to make you. I don't want to make anyone speak when they don't want to, though. Just getting into the very first few sentences here. Hi, Luna Soltero 19. Luna, how about that? We'll just go with Luna. Can you hear and see me all right? Okay, cool. That's kind of what I've been waiting for to start because I don't know if. Awesome. I didn't know if anyone could see or hear me, so I didn't want to start and have the video not come out like halfway decent at least. So we talked about this subject a little bit the other night, um, even though not necessarily text. This is Dion Fortune, the mystical Qabbala. Um, I don't know that much about her on reflection, but she was a sort of heavy hitter in the early 20th century occult tradition. This book is not one that I would recommend for history, the history of the Qabbala, nor is it one that I would recommend for scientific insights. I think her politics is really clunky, and I don't sign off on everything that she has to say. Um, That said, I'm just kind of gonna go into it and kind of try and elucidate her positions without signing off on them or without. I'm probably not going to do that much critique of them. What's up, Muso Patty Occult Tarot? How are you doing tonight? I haven't even gotten started yet. It's nice to have a couple of friendly faces in here. Muso Patty, do you know Dion Fortune? Maybe I'll just call you Muso. Good. Do you know Dion Fortune? This is the mystical Qabbala. I don't know if you know this text or not. I know it seems you have some background in the occult, so you might be familiar with this material. Again, I've already given this disclaimer tonight, but nice. Okay. Not personally, though I do have some of her work. Well, great. Glad to have you. Again, I will issue the same disclaimer, which is that I don't sign off on everything that she has to say, particularly about history, science, and I think that her politics is clunky at best, particularly around issues of race. She talks like somebody who was raised in the 19th century, because I'm pretty sure she was raised in the 19th century. Though she does not necessarily express, or she doesn't express like contempt or superiority for over other races or anything like that. But she just talks in a way that sounds clunky these days. That said, I'll probably skip over some of the more offensive sentences in here, just simply because I don't think this is necessarily the best place to hash those issues out. And you can see it on the screen anyway. So it's not like it's going to be. I just don't necessarily feel super comfortable reading some of those things out loud in public on the internet. Oh, this is only 188 pages. I always thought this was much longer. Again, this is foundational, like occult stuff. I think this is one of the best books I've ever read on the Qabbala. Maybe the best book I've ever read on the Qabbala. On the Hermetic Qabbala, I should say. She doesn't. That's another thing that I'd like to point out, is that there is a distinction between the Western occult and the Hebrew tradition. The only thing that I will be talking about is the Western occult. I do not pretend to speak to the Hebrew tradition of the Qabbala. That is a really robust and complex subject that I just don't view myself as qualified to talk about. So I'm not going to be talking about it. I'm going to keep myself to the Hermetic Qabbala. Yeah, Alice Bailey does too. So yeah, I'm just going to skip over sentences that I don't want to say out loud on the internet in public. But you can still read them on the screen. I don't think that there's anything so offensive in here that I wouldn't put it up on the screen, but I don't necessarily want people clipping me saying those things out of context. All right. So this is just the forward. We're gonna test the waters and see if this works. Forgive me if the stream looks really ugly tonight. I just kind of dove into things to make sure that they were working. I don't really have like a new scene for this, but whatever. Okay. The Tree of Life. By the way, the Tree of Life is up there on the screen. I think that you can see it. The Tree of Life forms the ground plan of the Western esoteric tradition. and as the system upon which pupils are trained in the fraternity of the inner light. The transliteration of Hebrew words into English is the subject of very much diversity of opinion, every scholar appearing to have his own system. In these pages, I have availed myself of the alphabetical table given by MacGregor Mathers in the Qabbala Unveiled, because this book is the one generally used by esoteric students. He himself does not adhere to his own table systematically, however, and even uses different spellings for the same words. This is very confusing for anyone who wishes to use the geometric method of elucidation, in which letters are turned into numbers. When, therefore, Mather gives alternative transliterations, I have followed the one which coincides with that given on his own table. The capitalization employed in these pages may also appear unusual, but it is the one traditionally used among students of the Western esoteric tradition. By the way, when she says Western esoteric tradition, she pretty much just means the Qabbala with a Q, which is to say the Hermetic Qabbala. She does not mean the Jewish esoteric tradition. That's where I would draw that distinction. I think that the Western... I got 4 people in here now. Hi, people. I should... whatever. I've given this disclaimer like 5 times and not talked, so I'm just going to talk. The capitalization employed in these pages may also appear unusual, but it is the one traditionally used among students of the Western esoteric tradition. In this system, common words such as earth or path are used in a technical sense to denote spiritual principles. When this is done, a capital is used to indicate the fact. When a capital is not used, it may be taken that the word is to be understood in its ordinary sense. As I have frequently referred to the authority of MacGregor Mathers and Aleister Crowley in matters of Kabbalistic mysticism, it may be as well to explain my position in relation to these 2 writers. I was at one time a member of the organization founded by the former, but have never been personally associated with the latter. I have never known either of these gentlemen personally, MacGregor Mathers having died before I joined his organization, and Aleister Crowley having then ceased to be associated with it. The Society of the Inner Light, founded by the late Dion Fortune, has courses for those who wish to seriously pursue the study of the Western esoteric tradition. Information about the society may be obtained by writing to the address below. Please include British stamps or international postage coupons in your letter if you wish a response. Here is the table of contents. The Yoga of the West. 1. Very few students of occultism know anything at all about the fountainhead whence their tradition springs. Many of them do not even know there is a Western tradition. Scholarship is baffled by the intentional blinds and defenses which initiates both ancient and modern have come wrapped themselves about, and concludes that the few fragments of a literature which have come down to us are medieval forgeries. They would be greatly surprised if they knew that these fragments, supplemented by manuscripts that have never been allowed to pass out of the hands of initiates and completed by an oral tradition, are handed down to schools of initiation to this day and are used as the basis of practical work of the Yoga of the West. 2. The adepts of those races whose evolutionary destiny is to conquer the physical plane have evolved a yoga technique of their own, which is adapted to their special problems and particular needs. This technique is based upon the well-known but little understood Qabbala, the wisdom of Israel. It may be asked, why is it that the Western nations should go to the Hebrew culture for their mystical tradition? The answer to this question will be readily understood by those who are acquainted with the esoteric theory concerning races and subraces. This is where she starts to get super clunky. Everything must have a source. Cultures do not spring out of nothing. The seed bearers of each new phase of culture must of necessity arise within the preceding culture. No one can deny that Judaism was the matrix of European spiritual culture when they recall the fact that Paul and Jesus were both Jews. No race except the Jewish race could have possibly served as the stock upon which the new dispensation was to be grafted, because no other race was monotheistic. Pantheism and polytheism had had their day, and a new, more spiritual culture was due. The Christian races owe their religion to the Jewish culture as surely as the Buddhist races of the East owe theirs to the Hindu culture. The mysticism of Israel supplies the foundation of modern Western of occultism. It forms the theoretical basis upon which all ceremonial is developed. Its famous glyph, the Tree of Life, which should be right up there, by the way, guys. Its famous glyph, the Tree of Life, is the best meditation symbol we possess because it is the most comprehensive. 5. It is not my intention to write a historical study of the sources of the Qabbala, but rather to show the uses that are made of it by modern students of the mysteries. For although the roots of our system are in tradition, there is no reason why we should be hidebound by tradition. A technique that is actually being practiced is a growing thing, for the experience of each worker enriches it and it becomes a part of the common heritage. It is not necessarily incumbent upon us to do the certain things or hold certain ideas because the rabbis who lived before Christ had certain views. The world has moved on since those days and we are under a new dispensation. But what was true in principle then will be true in principle now and of value to us. The modern Kabbalist is the heir of the ancient Kabbalist, but he must reinterpret doctrine and reformulate method in light of the present dispensation of if the heritage he has received is to be of any practical value to him. 7. I do not claim that the modern Kabbalistic teachings, as I have learned them, are identical with those of the pre-Christian rabbis, but I claim that they are the legitimate descendants thereof and the natural development therefrom. The nearer the source, the purer the stream. In order to discover first principles, we must go to the fountainhead. But a river receives many tributaries in the course of its flow, and these need not necessarily be polluted. If we want to discover where they are pure or not, we compare them with the pristine stream. And if they pass this test, they may well be permitted to mingle with the main body of waters and swell their strength. So it is with the tradition. That which is not antagonistic will be assimilated. We must always test the purity of a tradition by reference to first principles, but we shall equally judge of the vitality of the tradition by its power to assimilate. It is only a dead faith which remains uninfluenced by contemporary thought. The original stream of Hebraic mysticism has received many tributaries. We see its rise among the nomad star worshippers of Chaldea, where Abraham in his tent among his flocks hears the voice of God. But Abraham has a shadowy background in which vast forms move half seen. The mysterious figure of a great priest king, born without a father, without mother, without descent, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, administers to him the first Eucharistic feast of bread and wine after the battle with the kings in the valley, the sinister kings of Edom, who ruled ere there was a king in Israel, whose kingdoms are unbalanced force. I'm not sure who she's quoting here, but my suspicion is that it's MacGregor Mathers. Generation by generation, we trace the intercourse of the princes of Israel with the priest kings of Egypt. Abraham and Jacob went thither. Joseph and Moses were intimately associated with the court of the royal adepts. When we read of Solomon sending to Hiram, king of Tyre, for men materials to aid in the building of the temple, we know that the famous Tyrian mysteries must have profoundly influenced the Hebrew esotericism. When we read of Daniel being educated in the palaces of Babylon, we know that the wisdom of the Magi must have been accessible to the Hebrew Illuminati. Have a good night, Luna. It was great to see you. This ancient mystical tradition of the Hebrews possessed three literatures. the books of the law and the prophets, which are known as the Old Testament, the Talmud, or collection of learned commentaries thereon, and the Qabbala, or mystical interpretation thereof. Of these three, the ancient rabbis say that the first is the body of the tradition, the second its rational soul, and the third its immortal spirit. Ignorant men may with profit read the first, learned men study the second, but the wise meditate on the third. It is a strange thing that Christian exegesis has never sought the keys to the Old Testament and the Kabbalah. I got 5 people. I think they're all like new people too. So I'm going to give this quick disclaimer. I am reading Dion Fortune's The Mystical Qabbala. There's a lot of stuff in here that I don't personally endorse. Stuff about history, stuff about science. She also talks in a very clunky way, clunky 19th century sort of way about political issues, particularly race. And I'm not going to be reading passages that make me uncomfortable, but you can see them on the screen. So please don't accuse me of whitewashing. I just don't think this is the right place to hash that kind of issue out. Now, on to passage number 12. In our Lord's day, there were 3 schools of religious thought in Palestine: the Pharisees and Sadducees, of whom we read so frequently in the Gospels, and the Essenes, who are never referred to. Esoteric tradition avers that the boy Jesus ben Joseph, when his caliber was recognized by the learned doctors of the law who heard him speak in the temple at the age of 12, he was sent by them to the Essenian community near the Dead Sea to be trained in the mystical tradition of Israel, and that he remained there until he came to John to be baptized in the Jordan before commencing his mission at the age of 30. Be that as it may, the closing clause of the Lord's Prayer is pure Kabbalism. Malkuth, the kingdom; Hod, the power; Netzach, the glory, form the basal triangle of the tree of life, with Yesod, the foundation or receptacle of influences, as the central point. Whomever founded that prayer knew his Qabbala. So in the upper right-hand corner, again, you should be able to see the tree of life glyph. She is referring to the names of the circles on that bottom triangle there. The left one is, or Malkuth, the kingdom, is the bottom circle. To the left, bottom left-hand corner is going to be Hod, the power, and bottom right-hand corner is going to be Netzach, the glory. And then Yesod is right in the middle of the foundation. Now, I don't expect people to remember all of these names. Just let them wash over you. I say that like I have some authority. Like I'm going to test you after. Christianity had its esotericism in the Gnosis, which owed much to both Greek and Egyptian thought. In the system of Pythagoras, we see an adaptation of Kabbalistic principles to Greek mysticism. I'm not going to defend that historical claim. The exotic state-organized section of the Christian Church persecuted and stamped out the esoteric section, destroying every trace of its literature upon which it could lay its hands and striving to eradicate the very memory of a gnosis from human history. It is recorded that the baths and bakehouses of Alexandria were fired for 6 months with the manuscripts from the Great Library. Very little remains to us of our spiritual heritage and the ancient wisdom. Everything that was above ground was swept away, and it is only with the excavation of ancient monuments the sands have swallowed that we are beginning to rediscover its fragments. It was not until the 15th century, when the power of church was beginning to show signs of weakening, that men dared to commit to paper the traditional wisdom of Israel. Scholars declare that the Qabbala is medieval forgery because they cannot trace a succession of early manuscripts, but those who know the manner of working of esoteric fraternities know that a whole cosmogony and psychology can be conveyed in a glyph, which means nothing to the uninitiated. These strange old charts could be handed on from generation to generation, their explanation being communicated verbally, and the true interpretation would never be lost. When in doubt as to the explanation of some abstruse point, reference will be made to the sacred glyph, again in the upper right-hand corner. Oh no, I lost everybody. When in doubt as to the explanation of some abstruse point, reference would be made to the sacred glyph, and meditation thereon would unfold what generations of meditation had ensouled therein. It is well known to mystics that if a man meditates upon a symbol around which certain ideas have been associated by past meditation, he will retain access to those ideas, even if the glyph has never been elucidated to him by those who have received the oral from mouth to ear. Take 1 second. You can vouch for the what you said about the secret tradition, the oral tradition, or the if man meditates around upon a symbol around which certain ideas have been associated by past meditations. Yeah, got it. I can vouch for that too. That is definitely true. It is the case that if you pick now, here's what I'll say about the Tree of Life. There's a lot of writing about it. And a lot of people have done a lot of meditation on the Tree of Life. And as a result, there's a lot of wisdom organized around this system and sort of compacted into this system. And it has been for many generations. And as such, I think there's a lot to be gained out of studying the Tree of Life. Um, uh, and whether or not you think that it's a map of the universe and everything in it, I'll just leave to your discretion, the viewer. 16. The organized temporal force of the church availed to drive all rivals from the field and destroy their traces. We little know what seeds of mystical tradition sprang up only to be cut down during the Dark Ages, but mysticism is inherent to the human race. And although the church had destroyed all roots of tradition in her group soul, nevertheless, devout spirits within her fold rediscovered the technique of the soul's approach to God and developed a characteristic yoga of their own, closely akin to the Bhakti yoga of the East. The literature of Catholicism is rich in treatises on mystical theology, which reveal practical acquaintance with the higher states of consciousness, though a somewhat naive conception of the psychology thereof, thus revealing the poverty of a system which does not avail itself of the experience of tradition. I don't know if I agree with her on that. I do think that the mystical tradition is the mystical theology tradition, specifically the Christian mysticism, is, I think it's actually quite robust. It does lean on a certain history and narrative of the world, which is characteristically Christian, and you might think that that impoverishes it, and it might. I don't necessarily want to weigh in on that, but I do think that it is the case that mystical experience is pretty universal to the human condition. That I affirm in what she said. And I also think that I got a comment. Meister Eckhart, the man from Meister Eckhart is wonderful. I'm very on board with a lot. Yeah, the Cloud of Unknowing, exactly. I'm very on board with a lot of that writing. I think it's really beautiful. I think it's really lovely. The I don't want to say that it's naive. I want to say that it's couched in a characteristically Christian story of the world. But I do think that it reflects a genuine mystical experience as I have come to experience it and understand it. And so basically, I agree with her here, but I would push back a little bit on the idea that it involves a naive psychology. I think that's a bit chauvinistic. Um, yeah, I don't think it's an impoverished tradition. 17. The Bhakti Yoga of the Catholic Church is only suitable for those whose temperament is naturally devotional and who will find their readiest expression in loving self sacrifice. This is an interesting claim. Um, it's a genuinely interesting claim. Um, I was raised Catholic, so and I know a bit about Bhakti Yoga, um, and it's she's talking about the exoteric Catholic Church. So she's talking about the Catholic Church that is taught to the people in the pews, which I do think has a lot of overlap with Bhakti Yoga in terms of in a variety of ways. Um, um, but I think that the Catholic story or the Catholic way of being does is more robust than uh, she's giving it credit for. However, I probably would have agreed with that at an earlier stage in my life. Like 10 years ago, I probably would have agreed with that. But it is not everybody who is of this type. That is the naturally devotional. It's gone for years. Yeah, I get it. That's why I always spoke to Catholic monks face off. I have a few close to friends. Yeah, the monks are super fascinating. Uh, the esoteric traditions are just so much more interesting than the exoteric traditions in Catholicism. And I think that I think Catholicism gets a really bad rap um, because not enough people are sort of exposed to that sort of mystic side of Catholicism. Um, I mean, you really have to go back to the Counter Reformation and before that, Pseudo Dionysus and people like this to really get steeped in it. And I think that most people just aren't necessarily willing to do that. I would love to read through some of that material. It's not necessarily like that relevant to tarot, if relevant at all. Maybe it could be useful in unpacking some of Waite's stuff because he was a mystical Christian. Um, but I don't know how I would make it touch tarot. Um, and this channel is pretty focused on that. But maybe I'll diversify in the future. Um, the East, being tolerant, is wise and has developed various yoga methods, each of which is pursued by its adherents to the exclusion of the others. And yet, none would deny that the other methods are also paths to God for those whom they are suited. So, this is a claim about what's sometimes called soteriology. Um, soteriology is the study of paths, um, like mystical paths to enlightenment or towards the deity or something like that. And the idea, the famous example being the mountain has many paths going up to the summit, but the view is always the same. And it's a bit of a cliche to say that. Now it is at least. She might. It may not. It may have been a very novel thing to say in her time, though. She's very clearly, I think, drawing on Swami Vivekananda here, but that might not be so obvious to people who are more literate in Hinduism than me. Um, 18. In consequence of this deplorable limitation on the part of our theology, many Western aspirants take up Eastern methods. For those who are able to live in Eastern conditions and work under the immediate supervision of a guru, they may prove satisfactory, but it seldom gives good results when the various systems are pursued with no other guide than a book and under unmodified Western conditions. I'm really curious kind of what she means. Um, uh, I don't know what the conditions in the East are like, such that it would make. I mean, I guess she might be thinking of modernity, right? And I do think that there is something about the rise of modernity that seems to be at odds with mystical or spiritual pursuits. Um, uh, Capitalism eats religion, essentially. Um, uh, and there's a variety of reasons for that that I don't necessarily want to get into because it's less spiritual and more political. Um, but she may be talking in reference to that. She may be, I don't know how familiar she was with the foundations of sociology and things like that, but like someone like Max Weber uh, would probably agree with her. Eastern conditions may have been sufficiently pre-capitalist or not capitalist that they may well have had a completely different relationship to their spiritual life. That said, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to, having never lived in the East and not being an expert in those traditions. Well, certainly not those cultures. It's hard for me to judge that kind of claim, but I do think that there is a sociological basis to that sort of claim. Um, I do think that religion tends to manifest in a more pluralistic way in India than it does in the United States, and I think she was writing in England. Um, and that pluralism is what she's praising here, and I think it is a good thing. Um, I don't know. I think that uh, it's just a really interesting claim that I could think about for days, right? Like, what is the relationship between modernity and spiritual practice in a global sense? That's a deeply interesting question, and I don't know if we have a very robust way of talking about that. Um, uh, that's what I think she's getting at, though. Materialism, yeah, yeah, it is. It does have to do with materialism, right? Like it does have to do with. Um, I mean, I tend to think in terms of capitalism, but materialism may be a better way of thinking about the sort of spiritual orientation that arises with the rise or alongside the rise of capitalism. This sort of way of life that we see capitalism, we see the modern nation state, we see like the standardization of weights and metrics, we see all these different things sort of appear at the same time in uh, in Europe. uh, Specifically typically it's traced back to England and the Glorious Revolution, um, and then moves to France from there, etc. It's uh, but we see, so this big bucket of things that we see appearing in the 17th century, 18th century, etc. I'm just calling modernity at the moment, but like the spiritual orientation of modernity is probably best described as materialism in the broad sweep of history, at least. Um, It is for this reason, 19. It is for this reason that I would recommend to the white races. It sounds so gross. It is for this reason that I would recommend to the white races the traditional Western system, which is admirably adapted to their psychic condition. It gives immediate results, and if done under proper supervision, not only does it not disturb the mental or physical equipoise, as happens with regrettable frequency when unsuitable systems are used, but it produces a unique vitality. It is this particular vitality of the adepts which led to the tradition of the elixir of life. I have known a number of people in my time who might justly be considered adepts, and I have always been struck by that particular ageless vitality that they all possess. Now I have to start scanning these chapters. Yeah, she is getting at Western, right? Like she says the white races, right? And she means Western, but like I don't know. It's so clunkily phrased and it's so antiquated and so of its time. And uh uh she does unfortunately continue on with that line of thinking. But like it's not like she expresses contempt or superiority. You know what I mean? Like she doesn't seem to think that the Western system, like the quote unquote white races, are superior to anybody. She seems to think that they're handicapped, and this tradition is there, like is catered to that handicap. Um, but she doesn't give any sense of contempt. She doesn't give any sense of. This is why I don't. I, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it does put me in an awkward position. 20. On the other hand, however, I can only endorse what all the gurus of the Eastern tradition have always averred, that any system of psychospiritual development um, that any system of psychospiritual development can only safely and adequately carried on under the personal supervision of an experienced teacher. For this reason, although I should give in these pages the principles of the mystical Kabbalah, I do not consider it would be in anybody's interest to give the keys of its practice, even if by the terms of the obligation of my own initiation I were not forbidden to do so. But on the other hand, I do not consider it fair to the reader to introduce intentional blinds and misinformation, and to the best of my knowledge and belief, the information I give is accurate, even if incomplete. This is one of the reasons why I like her. She's very direct. Um, I much prefer her to Wait, who is just like pettifogging all over the place. Um, it may not be fair to compare them because she's living in like a post Golden Dawn world, and Wait was really bound by the Golden Dawn. Hold on just 1 second. I'm going to go ahead and use the restroom and refill my water glasses. Well, maybe I could read this next part. 21. The 32 mystical paths of the concealed glory are ways of life, and those who want to unravel their secrets must tread them, as I myself was trained. So can anyone be trained who is willing to undergo the discipline, and I will gladly indicate the way to any earnest seeker. The choice of a path. Yeah, this is a good time. This is a good breaking point. I'm going to use the bathroom, and I am going to fill up water glasses. Musa, thank you so much for hanging around, man. Oh, it's a marathon, not a sprint doing this. All right. The choice of a path. I can barely make out what those emojis are. I see an axe though, which is fucking sweet. Maybe I should make the stream 18 plus. I do have a tendency to curse like a sailor. The choice of path. Can you read what's up on the screen, Muso? I'm hoping that people can like follow along. Um, okay, good. You can read that. Fabulous. The choice of a path. 1. No student will ever make any progress in spiritual development who flits from system to system, first using some new thought affirmations, then some yoga breathing exercises, and some meditation postures, following these by an attempt at mystical methods of prayer. I feel called out, Dion Fortune. I resent you calling me out by name. You bitch. Each of these systems has its value, but that value can only be realized if the system is carried out in its entirety. Yeah, we have all trod that path, and I am uh I'm absolutely guilty of this. I feel like, I mean, I'm such an ADHD child that like of course that was going to be my path, right? But I don't think it's actually true that no student will make any progress going from tradition to tradition. I do think that progress would be slower, but I think that the fact that I have acquaintance with a lot of different traditions um, is actually quite useful now that I'm older. Um, um, the fact that I've like really buckled down and studied, like read primary source texts and in a variety of traditions and um, done that work across various cultures, I think really shapes and informs my worldview in a productive way. Even if it doesn't constitute what she is calling progress in spiritual development. That said, I do think that my personal spiritual development has been faster later on in life. Each of these systems has its value, but that value can only be realized if the system is carried out in its entirety. Mm, mm, maybe. I don't know what it is to carry out a system in its entirety, but whatever. They are the calisthenics of consciousness and aim at gradually developing the powers of the mind. The value does not lie in the prescribed exercises as ends in themselves, but in the powers that will be developed if they are persevered with. Um, I know that it's a little unfair. Um, I'm pretty sure that she wouldn't be acquainted with Zen Buddhism. It would be unlikely for her to be acquainted with Zen, particularly in an authentic way. There just wasn't a lot of translated material at that time to work with about Mahayana Buddhism. And like their views on Buddhism were all weird at this time. They like been a lot of scholarly work sorting out the history of Buddhism. Um, uh, so but I do think that Zen Buddhism does advance Zazen as an end in itself, and I think it dismisses powers that will be developed as superfluous. I think um, I think it's I just don't think it's. I mean, to be fair, Zen Buddhism is like intentionally deconstructive, right? So it's unclear that it's unclear. There's like an ironic dimension, um, a deconstructive dimension, a playful dimension to Zen Buddhism. So if a Zen Buddhist is saying that shikantaza is an end in itself, uh, it, I think that there's more underneath that than what she means here. So I don't know. I'm a little like skeptical. I would bring up Zen Buddhism as a counterexample, um, but I don't know what she would think about that. If we intend to take our occult studies seriously and make of them anything more than desultory light reading, we must choose our system and carry it out faithfully until we arrive, if not at the ultimate goal, at any rate at definitive practical results and permanent enhancement of consciousness. After this has been achieved, we may, not without advantage, experiment with the methods that have been developed upon other paths and build up an eclectic technique and philosophy therefrom. But the student who sets out to be an eclectic before he has made himself an expert will never be anything more than a dabbler. Again, I just don't agree with this, especially if you're studying like traditions that supplement each other. I do think that there are traditions that pair well together that inform each other. Particularly, I'm thinking of like Advaita Vedanta and Mahayana Buddhism. I think you can set those systems in dialogue with each other and get a lot out of them through that dialogue. And they help elucidate the system each other. They help elucidate each other, even though they're like dialectically opposed. Two, whoever has any practical experience of the different methods of spiritual development knows that the method must fit the temperament, and it must also be adapted to the grade of development of the student. Westerners, especially such as prefer the occult to the mystic path, often coming, Westerners, especially such as prefer occult to the mystic path, often come seeking initiation at a stage of spiritual development which an Eastern guru would consider exceedingly immature. Any method that is to be available for the West must have in its lower grades a technique which can be used as a stepping stone by those undeveloped students. To ask them to rise immediately to metaphysical heights is useless in the case of the great majority and prevents a start from being made. Yeah, again, she seems to think that Westerners are handicapped spiritually. And again, there's a sociological question there that might legitimize that. I don't know if it's. I don't know how it cashes out, though. I'd like to see. I don't know how you would quantify that, but I'd like to see some like research on that. Three, for a system of spiritual development to be applicable in the West, it must fulfill certain well defined requirements. To begin with, its elementary technique must be such that it is readily grasped by minds that have in them nothing of the mystic. Second, the forces it brings to bear to stimulate the development of the higher aspects of consciousness must be sufficiently powerful and concentrated to penetrate the relatively dense vehicles of the average Westerner, who makes nothing of whatever subtle vibrations. Yeah, I don't know if she's acquainted with the average Westerner, but I think that a lot of this material is going to be utterly lost on most people. And if this is the like stepping stone material, like I do think that there's a certain immaturity to a lot of, let's say, neophytes in Western occult traditions. Um, but I don't know if it's any different among monasteries in the East or anything like that. Thirdly, as few Europeans following oh Yeah, thirdly, as few Europeans following a racial dharma of material development have either the opportunity or the inclination to lead the life of a recluse, the forces employed must be handled in such a way that they can be made available during the brief periods that the modern man or woman can, at the commencement of the path, snatch from their daily avocations to give to the pursuit. They must, that is to say, be handled by a technique which enables them to be readily concentrated and equally readily dispersed. Because it is not possible to maintain these high psychic tensions while living the hard driving life of the citizen of a European city. Yeah, this is modernity, right? Um, the hard driving life of a citizen of a European city. Experience proves with unfailing regularity that the methods of psychic development which are effectual and satisfactory um, for the recluse produce neurotic conditions and breakdowns in the person who pursues them while compelled to endure the strain of modern life. Maybe. So much the worse for modern life, some may say, and adduce this undeniable fact as an argument for modifying our Western ways of living. Far be it from me to maintain that our civilization is perfect or that wisdom originated and will die with us. But it appears to me that if our karma or destiny has caused us to be incarnated with a body of a certain racial type and temperament, uh, I'm just going to skip this one, even though there's a funny little ending there. Mm, okay. 7. The Dharma of the West differs from that of the East. It is therefore desirable to try to implant Eastern ideals in a Westerner. Is it therefore desirable? Withdrawal from the earth plane is not his line of progress. The normal, healthy Westerner has no desire to escape from life. His urge is to conquer it and reduce it to order and harmony. It is only the pathological types who long to cease upon the midnight with no pain, to be freed from a world of birth and death. The normal Western temperament demands life, more life. 8. It is this concentration of life force that the Western occultist seeks in his operations. He does not try to escape from matter into spirit, leaving an unconquered country behind him to get on as best as it may. He wants to bring the Godhead down to mankind and make divine law prevail, and even in the kingdom of the seven shades, or the kingdom of the shades, excuse me. This is the root motive for the acquisition of occult powers upon the right hand path, and it explains why initiates do not abandon all for the mystic divine union, but cultivate white magic. So that's an interesting claim because the Gnostics were precisely about leaving the realm of matter to go into the realm of spirit. That was their thing. And she seems very, very pleased with the Gnostics. Um, It is this white magic which consists in the application of occult powers to spiritual ends, by means of which a large proportion of the training and development of the Western aspirant is carried out. I have seen something of a good many different systems, and in my opinion, the person who tries to dispense with ceremonial working is at a great disadvantage. Development by meditation alone is a slow process in the West because the mind stuff upon which it has to work and the mental atmosphere in which the work has to be done are very resistant. The only purely meditative school of Western yoga is that of the Quakers, and I think that they would agree that their path is for the few. The Catholic Church combines mantra yoga with its bhakti yoga. Yeah, 10. It is by means of formula that the occult selects and concentrates the forces he wishes to work with. These formulae are based upon the Kabbalistic tree of life, and whatever system he may be working, whether he be assuming the god forms of Egypt or evoking the inspiration of Iacchus with chant and dance, he has the diagram of the tree in the back of his mind. It is in the symbolism of the tree that the Western initiates are drilled, and it supplies the essential ground plan of classification to which all other systems can be related. The rosary is a mantra, that's true. And there's like the Jesus prayer, which is which just is a mantra. Um, um, I mean, there are examples certainly, um, and it does. Hmm. If by bhakti yoga she just means devotion, then yes, it does involve those things. But I do think that contemplative prayer is a form of what we think of as meditation. Um, I think that what's described in the cloud of unknowing is a meditative practice. I don't think it's not that different from many Buddhist or Hindu, approaches to meditation. It is in the symbolism of the tree that Western initiates are drilled, and it supplies the essential ground plan of classification to which all other systems can be related. The ray upon which the Western aspirant works has manifested itself through many different cultures and developed a characteristic technique in each. The modern initiate works a synthetic system, sometimes using an Egyptian, a Greek, or even a Druidic method for different methods are suited for different purposes and conditions. In all cases, however, the operation he designs is strictly related to the paths of the tree of which he is master. If he possesses the grade which corresponds to the Sephira Netzach, he can work with the manifestation of the force of that aspect of the Godhead, distinguished by the Kabbalists by the name of Tetragrammaton Elohim. In whatever system he may select, in the Egyptian system, it will be Isis of nature, in the Greek, Aphrodite, in the Nordic, Freya, in the Druidic, Caridwen. In other words, he possesses the powers of the sphere of Venus in whatever traditional system he may be using. Having attained a grade in one system, he has access to the equivalent grades of all the other systems of his tradition. Yeah, it's it's um the Kabbalah. I mean, the Kabbalah is being used here as a lingua franca, right? As a common language, um, uh, within which systems can communicate with each other. Um, it's interesting that she confines it to the West, because I know that she's drawing on 777 as in this work, and Crowley very explicitly attributes like Hindu gods and Buddhist meditations and all of these things. He doesn't limit Kabbalah to the West, right? And she does, and it's interesting that there seems to be a disagreement there. 11. But although he may use these other systems as occasion serves, experience proves that the Kabbalah supplies the best groundwork and the best system upon which to train a student before he begins to experiment with the pagan systems. The Kabbalah is essentially monotheistic. The potencies it classifies are always regarded as the messengers of God and not his fellow workers. This principle enforces the concept of a centralized government of the cosmos and of the grip of the divine law upon the whole of manifestation, a very necessary principle with which to imbue any student of the arcane forces. It is the purity, sanity, and clarity of the Kabbalistic concepts, as resumed in the formula of the Tree of Life, which makes that glyph such an admirable one for the meditations that exalt consciousness and justify us in calling the Kabbalah the yoga of the West. Oh, we're on to another part. Another chapter. What time is it? 10:13? Four 4:13 there. What time did I start? Around, I didn't really start reading till 9, but I started the stream at 8:30. So I've been reading for 2 hours, something like that. that might be where I want to wrap it up. A little under 2 hours. I don't know. Does that feel short to you, Muso? I can't tell what's short and what's long on Twitch. Yeah, maybe I will wrap it up. Because I feel like the video will be a nice like bite-sized chunk. Maybe I'll go for longer next week. Muso, what? How do you feel about that format? I had 5 people in here at one point, and they all fled at the same time, and I can't tell if the format is just like a boring format, and if it is a boring format, it would. I wish there was just more people talking. I wish there was more of a conversation, but like again, I'm probably asking too much as a new streamer. It's actually pretty niche. What do you mean by that? Yeah, I hope I'll cover my quarter. I'm excited to be doing this. I'm excited to have the opportunity to do it now. And I like reading the Dion Fortune probably more than the Weight. But I do like reading both. It's sort of a fun thing to do. And I mean, people do seem to be relatively interested, but they may want to watch more like after the fact. Oh yeah. It is not the usual. I don't know. I hope it's just not boring. That's like the worst thing it could be. Well, either way, I'm having fun doing it, and I'm going to keep doing it. And I don't really give a fuck if people come, but I hope they do because it'd be more fun if there were more people. Muso, thank you so much for coming. Yeah, Tuesday does seem to be quiet. But again, thank you so much for coming. It was an absolute pleasure to be bullshitting with you, and I hope to do more of it in the future. I also am a little distracted. I have someone messaging me. I should be more focused. Of course, and I will be doing this regularly, and I hope you stop by. Again, this whole look is really gross. I have to design like a scene for the Qabbala text, just because like the formatting is different than the weight. Oh, I didn't realize that the side was cut off. My bad. Shit. All right. Well, I am going to head off then. I hope you have a good night, Musa.